Trevor Edwards,
Okay.
and I was with the 14th Field Regiment Royal Artillery. It's Martinique Battery, I think, that I joined in Korea.
Trevor, just tell me where you're from and tell me a bit about your life before Korea. What you remember as a boy, as a child, schooling, etc.
Well, my father was a regular soldier, and the outbreak of the Second World War, we were living in Oxford, having come back from. I was born in India, because he had been posted out there. My wife joined him out there, and so on. But we came back to this country, and we lived in Yeomanry House in Oxford. What was the name of the Manor Road? Manor Road, and I first went to school there in Oxford.
How old were you when you came back from India?
I was about 3, 4 years, or 3 or 4.
No memories of India?
Only very vague. I can remember vaguely the children diving for money that was being thrown in the mud in the harbour near at Bombay, was it? Bombay? Yeah. Yeah, I can vaguely remember that, yeah.
When you were schooled in Oxford, do you ever remember hearing about Korea? You have a knowledge of the East. Did you know about the Far East?
No, I didn't know anything about Korea. I knew about Japan, obviously, because that featured in the war, but no, I didn't know anything about Korea as a country, no.
How was the war for you?
Well, the Second World War,
Yeah.
well, most of that, my father, he was a serving soldier, so the outbreak of war, he was sent off. And my mother, we were then living in Oxford, but she decided to come back to where her siblings lived, sisters and brothers, and that was at Yorktown, Camberley. And we came back there, that was in 1939, and that's where she stayed for the rest of her life, actually. I left school at 14. I went to school in Camberley and Yorktown, but I left school at 14. I didn't have any grades at school, as it were. I didn't really like school particularly. And I left at 14, well, just before my 14th birthday actually, and I went to work as they called me a boy improver, a trainee carpenter with the Civilian Royal Engineers at the Royal Military College, as it was then, Sandhurst. And I did probably three and a half years there until just before my 17th birthday. Yeah, well, I left school at 14, went to work at the Royal Military College for a branch of the Royal Engineers, the Civilian Royal Engineers it was. I was there as a boy improver. This was at the back end of the war. It was the only place where you could get work in those days, as the only ones that could get materials in wartime. All the building firms, they just shut down more or less, unless it was repair work, bomb damage, that sort of thing. But I worked there as a trainee carpenter. I was involved going over the old and the new buildings in the college, doing repair work for, as you appreciate, the cadets that were there. They used to stump up and down on the floor, practicing their marching and so on, and of course the floorboards used to suffer. So I was forever up there repairing flooring, and of course the windows used to go, because they were all sash corded and large windows in the building, and the sash cords used to go frequently. They had to be replaced. Almost a full-time job really, doing that, putting up coat hooks which they pulled off the walls and that sort of thing. Yeah, but it was good. I was there for about 3.5, 4 years, I suppose, in all. And then I joined the army. I went in as a regular soldier
What
In-
year was that?
1948. I went in September 48, and I went into the Royal Artillery. I went up, did my training at Oswestry. Initially as a gunner, and up there we used to go over to Trosfennid, firing live ammunition in Wales. And then from there I got posted out to Germany. I was in Germany before my 18th birthday actually. I went stationed in Kiel, which was quite a coincidence really, because the barracks I occupied in Kiel were the old, had been used by the German submariners, so they're quite plush barracks. But they were the same barracks that my father actually went to when he was in the army, at the end, when he'd gone up through Germany, all the rest of it, during the war, and he finished up in the very same barracks.
Okay.
Yes, it was strange, and I was there for quite a while actually.
You were there during the airlift?
That started around about that time. Yeah, I wasn't involved with it.
No, but it was on.
But
it was in Germany at the time.
Yeah. Because in those days you weren't allowed to wear civilian clothes. No fraternisation and all that sort of thing with the population. But that went by the board actually, because the locals, they couldn't get hold of coffee or anything like that, so we could get some for them, you know. And I made some friends actually with them, and in fact on one occasion I went out. There's a ferry used to run on the harbour. I got this ferry down to the barn off the station, and they met me there, and took me off, gave me some civilian clothing which I put on, and we went to a nightclub. It was quite interesting, really. A bit risky, I suppose, but because Kiel was quite heavily bombed during the war, so there's quite a lot of anti-feeling about. But then from there I got posted back to the UK. I went up to Durham, County Durham, stayed at Brunsmouth, just outside Durham, and because I'd been promoted by then, I was a bombardier, and the battery clerk basically. And then of course they posted me from there. After a short time I went down to Salisbury Plain. I went down to a new experimental unit. It was a locating battery. It had just been formed using big radar sets towed by matadors. They were so big, these things. But it was really, the idea was to plot mortar trajectories, so you could actually pinpoint where mortars were being fired from. Would never have worked in practice because these units were far too heavy. You know, they go onto soft ground and they just get bogged straight in. But anyway, it was all experimental, and using the same sort of type of thing. We were in the artillery with the plotting boards and all the rest of it. And of course in those days we were having to use slide rules and logarithm tables and all that. I couldn't do it now, mind. In order to get all the calculations. There's quite a lot involved actually, in especially when firing live ammunition, because the type of ammunition, because 25 pound used to fire all different types of munition, from high explosive to airburst to smoke, or even pamphlets, dropping leaflets, that sort of thing. And all of it required different calculations. because the trajectory would vary according to each one, and of course then you had to contend with the wind speed and wind direction at different altitudes, affecting the shell in flight. And then of course temperature came into it as well, so the rate of burning of the cordite, the charges when the gun was fired. It's quite...
It's not just pulling the trigger, is it?
No.
But when did you know you were going to be leaving Germany and going to Korea then?
That was during my time in Osnabrück. I got sent back to Woolwich as a transit place for Korea, and I was given leave from there, embarkation leave. It's on my notes there, the date that I actually embarked at Southampton. It was in June, I think.
21st of May 1952.
Or May, was it? Yeah. Yeah.
And
It was on the...
how did you feel about going to Korea?
I didn't have... we weren't married then, but we were courting, Rose and I, even back in those days.
No choice. You do as you're told,
But
don't you?
you said you weren't going to wait for me, and...
Well, I was going to college.
I don't want to have an on-screen. I don't want an on-screen pitch, you know.
But no, I was quite looking forward to going out to see different places, you know, in that sense, because we sailed out, took 5 weeks on the Orwell. And I was saying in my notes there, it was quite hot most of the journey, especially when we got down into the through the Suez Canal. It turned very hot, and the drink, we used up all the water had to be replenished when we got to Aden. You know, it was the water that they put in was so heavily chlorinated, you just couldn't drink it. Even in tea, you couldn't touch it. So we spent all our money on soft drinks. So when we got to Colombo, as it was then, they replenished the water in the tanks. But of course, we didn't have any money on us, and when we got to Singapore, which was the next stop, I didn't go ashore because nothing to spend, which is a shame, really. But from there, we went out through the China Seas, and then through the Malacca, through the Straits of Formosa, where we were buzzed by the Chinese. They used to put searchlights on us at night. It was quite hairy, really, because they were fighting us in Korea at that time. They'd come into the war there, and they obviously knew who we were. So it was a little bit hairy. But anyway, we made it through and went to, it was Busan then. They've changed that name to Busan for some reason. We docked there. We had a reception, I mentioned in there, because we had the Black Watch on board with us, the 1st Battalion Black Watch Regiment. And they had an American band on the quayside with black musicians who played some welcoming music. And there were some Korean ladies in their national dress and that sort of thing. And of course the Black Watch, they put a demonstration on with their bagpipes. They were all very entertaining.
What did you think of Korea at that point? Had you had
Well, looking at it, I mean, it was a mountainous country.
What did you see from the ship there when you were just watching a band? I mean, did it look war-torn?
Sorry?
Did it look war-torn at that point?
No, because the Busan had never been occupied.
Yeah.
When during the war, they formed a perimeter around it, so it had never been actually occupied by the enemy.
So this just looked like a nice harbour with some with a free concert.
That's right. It was just an ordinary harbour, yeah. And of course we went into a transit camp when we got off ship overnight, and then we got on this train, one of the old clapped out trains from the Japanese occupation. A steam train, no windows, all wooden seats. And we were taken up to Seoul. That was about a 24-hour journey, I think, quite a long time. And went into transit again in Seoul, and then we were loaded onto 3-ton lorries and taken up to the front, which was 35 miles or so north, where the 38th parallel was. And this is where the fighting had become static. We were just north of the River Imjim, actually. To get to our position, we had to cross the Imjim using a bridge built by the American sappers. It was called Pintow Bridge. Nice piece of work, actually, built on the Bailey Bridge principle. But it was a bit hairy because we had pontoons otherwise across the river, which didn't give you much hope if you had to come out in a hurry getting back across, but never mind. I arrived on the position in the middle of the night. It was totally pitch black when I got there, but we were led down some tracks to the gun position into a prepared bivvy, we called them, just a dugout with sandbags and that sort of thing reinforcing around it. And we had to sleep on the floor on our ponchos to begin with until we could get ourselves sorted out with getting a camp bed. We weren't supplied with anything like that. We had to barter with the Canadians or who was the others? The
Americans.
The Americans, yeah. To get a case of sake beer and that you could get a camp bed, you know. I didn't bother personally because I constructed one out of some angle iron and a salt cable, the telephone cable. I just used it and laced it, made a base and strung it from the roof, suspended it from the roof of the bivvy, which was far better really because you were way off the ground, away from the rats and the water that used to come in, the rain. And the only downside was that when the guns fired on the position, of course, the concussion used to cause the bed to bounce a bit. But you got used to that. Never used to affect me after a while. You sleep through it. Most of my time was spent on the gun position doing the calculations to various targets. But of course, being static for a while, most of the targets were code named. We'd previously ranged it on them. We knew exactly what the range and the switch was to reach them, and all we had to do was calculate for the air temperatures and the wind speeds and all that sort of thing. Just do final corrections to get the shell to hit the target, and it was quite successful. If you're firing a variable time fuse, which is the airburst, which we fired a lot of, because of the mountainous conditions that we were in, at certain switches, the contours used to affect the radar being sent out from the shell itself, and it would explode prematurely. If
the shells didn't have a radar on them, did they?
Yeah, but yeah, they had they were called variable time fuses. What happened was they would send out an impulse. What was the radar? Because it used to hit the ground and return to the shell, and when the two coincided, it would explode, and it was set to explode about 20 feet above the ground, so it would follow the contour of the ground. It was very, very effective, yeah. But sometimes, as I say, the impulses were being sent out as soon as that shell fired, because the rotation of the shell would activate it, and if it came back prematurely, it would detonate the shell and it would explode in front of the gun. And you saw it happen quite often, and the base bait of the shell used to come back very often to hit the gun itself. Yeah.
Never got hurt.
Well, no, but fortunately most of the shrapnel would go forwards, you know, with the explosion. But no, you got to know exactly where those places were. You know, you avoid a switch to coincide with that particular position. But no, we were there quite a while, and then we were in direct support of the Royal Norfolk Regiment, as it was then. They've since disbanded, I believe. We were in direct support of them, and of course I used to, from time to time, go and liaise with the OP up there, the observation post, and do the various calculations to send back to the guns to fire on targets. So you could observe everything up there, because you were looking out into no man's land, which was far more interesting. Because, as I say, we used to have various features were code named. Like there was one place in the middle of no man's land, like a little conical shaped hill, which was occupied by the enemy, and they had dogs with them on there and everything, you know. And if things were a bit quiet, we'd liven up by firing an HE shell at them. And of course they were so well, shell shocked, I suppose, been there so long. The dogs would come out and run around, barking like mad, and and they would come out as well, and they'd be waving and that sort of thing. And of course the thing was, it was a bit risky, because we'd fire a number of shells in rapid succession on their position, and of course they could be caught. But they used to dive back into these dugouts when the shells, they could hear them coming, I suppose.
They used to harass the dogs.
Well, the dogs, they just ran around, yeah. 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 But it used to liven things up for a little bit. And of course, and the first thing in the morning too, because we used to stand to before first light, because that was the time when an attack was, you know, when they were likely to attack more. Was more likely first light. But also you could see across no man's land, you could observe their mule trains leaving the area. They'd been in overnight supplying their own troops by pack mule, and of course you pick them up on the skyline, and of course we'd fire at them, and of course the mules would take off. And the handlers would be chasing after them to try and catch them, you know. But I mean, you could see it. It was at a distance, but you could see it. Yeah.
Tell me about the rats.
The rats.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, they were unpleasant things. They weren't very big. We used to call them Manchurian rats. They were grey in colour with a black stripe, which used to run from the tip of the nose right down to the tip of the tail, then right down the middle of the back. But the trouble was they give you infect you with almost like we used to call it songa, like a cancerous problem. You know, if they bit you, you couldn't stop bleeding.
And they bit you, did they?
Well, I didn't get bitten, no, but some people did. And especially if they weren't careful, like these people sleeping on camp beds would have sleeping bags. If they didn't turn those inside out before they got into them, that's where the rats would be. They get in there during the day for the warmth. And if you got into a sleeping bag and a rat inside it, you get bitten. Yeah. But I mean, I was okay. As I say, I made this hammock, which I suspended from the roof, so I didn't quite have that problem.
Talk about the temperature.
During the summer, it was very hot, very humid. A bit smelly because the paddy fields that were around were all, although in the immediate vicinity of where we were, the fighting, they'd ceased operating, but those that were, they used to fertilise them with natural feces. And that went on most of the time, actually. And of course, that used to breed the flies and the mosquitoes and all that sort of thing.
Did you see other wildlife?
Pardon?
Did you see other wildlife at all?
I didn't see any. No, I didn't. I didn't notice any other wildlife.
Amazing, isn't it? Because you're in the countryside and everybody talks about it, just there's no birds or anything like that.
No, I don't recall seeing anything like that. No, no, I don't. Mind you, there wasn't a lot of spare water about as it was. I don't know. I suppose the animals would need it to survive, but I mean, all these paddy fields we occupied paddy fields with gun positions. They'd all been dried out, you know. This place, there was an officer, a second lieutenant with us, and myself, bombardier, and four gunners, and we were in a canvas in a tent in this valley. To get to it, we had to go. It was all heavily mined around there, minefields, and we had tape markers to go through the minefield, so you kept to the right track. And we were in this valley under canvas, and then going up. It was called the Kumuksan. It was a mountain. Part way up that mountain, we were building this observation post, which we would have used had we needed to. But it meant climbing up there on a daily basis to prepare it, ready for occupation should it be needed. But whilst we were there, one night we used to have put sentries out. Obviously, during the night, we all took a turn, even the officer, in sentry, just making sure things were all right. But during this particular night, there was an explosion. This was getting towards dawn, actually. There was an explosion on the hill beside us, and nobody took a lot of notice initially, because I mean mines were going off all the time prematurely. Probably rats or anything like that would set them off, you know, if the right condition. But anyway, first light, the officer was doing the stag, as we called it, and he heard shouting coming from the top of the hill, and of course he mustered us all. We came out, and myself, the officer, and another gunner, we climbed up this hillside, and we had to climb over wire netting, barbed wire fencing rather, which had been put in. But we were going into a minefield, which we didn't realise, but they were surface mines, booby traps. And we later learned that's what two North Korean guys, saboteurs they were, they'd come through in the night. They'd seen us in the valley, and they decided to give us a berth. And they went up over the top of this hill and went into this minefield and tripped one of these mines, and they were both injured. and that's what it was. That they were caught one of the shouting out in the morning. Anyway, we got up there without any problem, without realising that there were mines there. Anyway, found this guy injured, and he had quite serious wounds to the back of his legs and his buttocks and that sort of thing. The guy gave him. We used to carry medical kits then with. And in them, they used to carry a phial of morphia, and like a toothpaste tube with a needle on the end. And I injected this guy with this morphia. I've never known anyone with such tough skin. I had a job to get this needle in, you know, to place the morphia, but I managed it. And then the officer said, well, we need really to find a better way down than the way we came up, because it was quite steep. We're going to have to carry these out on stretchers. So he said, have a look round and see if you can see a better way down. So I went round the top of this hill, we'll call it a hill, it was more part mountain, I suppose. But I walked round there, and as I did so, I came across the second individual who had been spotted before. He was behind the other one, and he'd been hit by the round went off, and he got injuries to his abdomen and the front of his legs and that sort of thing. But as I approached, he saw me coming, obviously, and he started waving his arms. And of course, he obviously couldn't speak English, and I couldn't converse with him either. But he was gesticulating and pointing, you know, and of course I could see there were tripwires, and what they'd done, they'd put a 36 mils grenade into a tin can, C7 can, you know, food can, put it in there, which is just the right fit to take the pin out, but the lever would be inside the tin. Tie a tripwire to it across the path, and of course when trying to trip it, they pulled the grenade out, and the lever would fly, and it would explode. And that's what they'd done. They'd tripped one of these 36 mils grenades. But he was pointing, and of course he drew my attention to the fact that there were more of them about, you know.
He saved your life.
He did, in fact, yeah. And I sort of shouted to the others then and said, don't move around, look out for tripwires. But we all got off there safely in the end, and we had to take these guys out. We got stretchers brought in, we sent the driver to get stretchers, and of course the CMPs came as well to take these guys off our hands.
CMP standing for?
Corps Military Police, yeah. Yeah, they came, and eventually when we got them off the side of this mountain, we carried them down and handed them over to them. They took them off to interrogate, I would imagine, as well as to treat them for their injuries.
Koang San, better known as Hill 355, isn't it?
Pardon?
The hill that you talked about, Koang Sang, is...
Koang San?
Yeah, Hill 355.
Yeah.
Can I ask, at the time you were there, had they built the sort of cable that was taking stuff up and down the back of it?
Oh no, nothing like that then. No, but all the roads actually in Korea, apart from the one road from Incheon to Seoul, which was metalled, everything else was just dirt tracks. But on this particular, I've put the date on there. I think it was in it was September time when the second attack, the main attack on the Hook took place. What happened? The Black Watch were already occupying it, but they hadn't spotted it actually, which was a bit remiss of them. But the Chinese had moved up and had dug in on reverse slopes of some hills and that sort of thing just in front of the Black Watch position. So they occupied all those those caves that they dug out prior to the attack, so that when they actually attacked, they were in on top of the Black Watch almost immediately, without being spotted. And it was quite interesting, really, because what the Chinese used to do, they would open fire when they were going to put in a frontal attack. They would open fire on a sector of the front which wasn't going to be attacked. It was really to divert our attention to that area. And of course what they would then do is switch from there to the place they were going to attack, and at the same time as they were firing on that position, their own troops would be coming in through their own shell fire. Yeah, quite a few of them were getting killed in the process, by their own shells. Then that happened there with the Black Watch. They came in out of these caves and attacked the Black Watch, and of course we were ordered by our own OP, because he was being inundated by them. He was up with them, and he brought down shell fire on his own coordinates, his own map reference. And the whole regiment, the 36 guns in the regiment, were all firing on that position.
Just in front, weren't they?
Mainly airburst. But the Chinese, of course, they were coming through it, but they were trying to get out. They were jumping in these trenches alongside the Black Watch. And so there's quite a lot of hand-to-hand fighting went on as well.
And what are you doing on a situation like that? Can you remember that day?
Yeah, I do. I remember that, because actually on that particular night, we'd been sent out on what was called harassing fire. And we'd left the gun position, and we were occupying a place not far from the Black Watch, actually. And the intention was that we would fire our guns at suspected targets during the night, which we thought may have been used by the enemy at random. We just fire at random, hoping to catch the enemy in the open. But of course, on that night, of course, all the guns were being used to support the Black Watch, and all the shells were going over the top of us onto that position. Yes, and of course, when we got back to the gun position in the morning, because we went back in, you had a job actually to see the guns. All the ammunition cases and that type of paraphernalia were just littered all around, almost burying the guns out of sight.
Did you then need to go on to the Black Watch position to help them clear up the lines down
No.
there? Or you just
No.
So you didn't see
No,
the
we had.
aftermath?
I've got a photograph somewhere of a gunner from the 14th Field he used to lay the telephone cables, the wires for communication purposes. And there's a picture of him there with the Black Watch after the attack. Yeah.
Did you see the lines afterwards? Did you see the amount of damage that had been caused?
I didn't actually go to that part of the front, but I was close enough. I mean, to see them evacuating the wounded out, the injured coming out. They had these small helicopters. They would come in and take them out with. Yeah.
Something you've written here that I've never heard about is the barrage balloon.
Over Pam and John. Yeah, that was put up there during the hostilities. 'Cause Pam and John, the peace negotiations were going on there whilst we were in situation, but we were still fighting. But of course, the barrage balloon was put up so people recognised it as a neutral area.
So you were firing guns and blowing each other to pieces, but just here there was a
Yeah, just to our it was on our left flank. You see, the Pam and John was quite close to the coast, and this barrage balloon had been put up there, and you avoided firing in that area. So
amazing, yeah, never heard of it. What colour was it?
What the boat? I don't know. I don't remember actually.
Okay. Did you ever go to the coast?
Not then. No. The only thing I did, I when I was liaising with the Norfolks, I used to go up and spend time up there with them. On occasions, we need to get heavier artillery than our 25-pounders could provide. So we used to have to liaise with the Americans, and I used to have to go with them. I was going to stay with them for a week or so at a time, and use their heavier artillery to range on our targets. And I'd have to do the calculations for them to fire, convert into metric for them to fire on our targets, giving them the switches and the range and all that sort of thing. But used to stay with them for a while, because you used to see how the other half lived then. Because the Americans, they still had all their home comforts. They were dining proper mess halls with tablecloths and places set to eat and all that sort of thing, plates and everything else. And they stacks of ice cream and all that type of thing. Something unheard of in our line. Where we were concerned, we'd line up with our mess cans, and you hold your mess can out, and they'd ladle the food out of these large drums and slop it into your mess can.
And if you had to walk far, by the time you got there in the winter,
You just queue up. Well, you had to queue up for it, yeah. And in fact, I had a colleague who that we used to get mortared quite a lot, and he got hit by a mortar piece of shrapnel from a mortar, caught him in his back. Yeah, when he was queuing for his food.
Tell me about the. I've heard about the Chinese propaganda, but you were also involved in that. Just talk about what you did there.
Well, what they used to they had like a similar situation to Tokyo Rose during the war. You heard about that, have you? Where they used to have a speaker and a female come on and sort of broadcast messages over this speaker to the enemy, as it was, their enemy. And they'd have facts as well, and they had the same there. They had this speaker. They would call out, and they'd give the names of individuals, and even where they came from. And they used to try and cause dissent. They would say, "Oh, you so and so, your wife's having an affair with so and so." And yeah,
you used to fire leaflets to them, is that right?
Oh well, yes. We used to fire propaganda. I've got some pictures in my thing there of those leaflets, propaganda leaflets, mainly featuring Stalin, who was the Russian involved principally. We used to fire these leaflets using these airburst shells. Yeah.
And also you used to fire a bit of poo over. Poo.
Yeah. Oh no, that was all. That shouldn't have been done really, but no, that was the lads having a prank, I think.
Explain it, because I've not heard.
But I think, there was consternation during that, where the Chinese were alleging that we were using germ warfare on them. And of course it could have been as a result of that, I suppose.
Because you were, just explain, because nobody knows what you're talking about, but just explain, how was it done? Explain it.
Well, you'd use an airburst shell, and instead of like having leaflets in there, you'd fill it with excreta, and fire that, and of course it would just spread this out of the shells when it reached the target.
And you were accurate.
Oh yeah, 20 feet above the ground.
What about the time you went back to Japan with the English guy that?
Oh, the one who assaulted the sergeant major.
Yeah, just talk about that. What happened? When was that?
No, I was just detailed as an escort to take this individual to Curie, which is where the Canadian military police had their detention centre, Glasshouse. It meant travelling by train from Seoul. I took the prisoner down to Seoul overnight in transit, and then on train down to Busan, where we got the ship across to Curie.
Who was he? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I don't remember who he was, but I do remember that we were all issued with a 303 rifle and a band of 50 rounds of ammunition to go with it, and it was a court-martial offence not to carry that. If you were out and about, you had to have it with you. And of course, the prisoner had his, and it was his personal property. And of course, I took that. I had possession of it, but I had to take it with me to Japan. And of course, the CMPs, when I got to this place at Curie, they went ballistic because I had this rifle and ammunition, which I handed over to them. And they didn't want to take it. I said, well, it's his personal possession, you know, it's his personal kit. I said, if you're in Korea, I said, you'd be on a court-martial if you didn't have it with you.
And when you went to Japan, did you enjoy it?
Oh, I didn't see a lot of it. I was only there overnight.
Okay.
And then I went back to Irigumi, caught an aircraft, a Dakota aircraft, and flew back to Seoul. Landed in a blizzard.
What was Seoul like then?
Seoul,
Yeah, what was it like then?
very, been devastated because it's been occupied twice by the enemy. They've been pushed down twice prior to then. It was in quite a mess. And of course the airfield was in a different place to what it is now. When we went out on a revisit, the airfield we landed at was not the one that I went into when I flew from Japan.
Talk about ENSA, ENSA, the entertainments.
Oh, the entertainment. Well, we had. I should have gone on. They called it Rest and Recuperation, R&R, Rest and Recuperation. I should have gone on that to Tokyo, but there was such a backlog. I never got to it. But I did go to Incheon, which was another Rest and Recuperation centre, and I met up there with Ted Ray, the comedian. He came out to entertain the troops, and I sat and had a chat and a beer with him at Incheon. And quite strangely, he was writing an article in the Evening Standard, and Rosemary picked it up. Because I was called Eddie Edwards then, but Rosemary picked it up he wrote an article and said I had a beer with Eddie Edwards at Incheon.
How amazing.
Yeah. Because Rosemary picked it up, I didn't realise he was putting it in the paper.
It was Ted Ray, wasn't it?
Ted Ray, yeah, Ted Ray.
That's lovely.
Yeah, and because we had Carol Carr, she was an American singer. She used to come and sing and entertain. Used to get some shows like that. But most of abolition-wise, they had these canvas constructed places where they had where you could have a steam bath and that sort of thing. But it was quite difficult because there was quite a backlog in getting into them. So what we used to do is we used to get a truck and go down to the River Imjim and have a swim in there.
Talk about Christmas.
Oh yeah, that was quite interesting because I was up with the Norfolks then, and stood to just before first light, and when it got light, looking out into no man's land, the Chinese had come out during the night and they decorated a tree, which was forward of our position, but they decorated it with tinsel and all that sort of thing, and hung presents on them. And of course, we thought, well, it's a booby trap, which it could have been. But it turned out not to be, actually, because when they eventually went out and investigated it, they found that the tree was they put bars of Cadbury's chocolate on it. And, yeah, with messages saying, we don't want to fight you, go home, sort of thing.
Wow.
Yeah. And, of course, they used to come right up to the wire, because we had barbed wire just in front of us. And they would put Christmas cards on the barbed wire. Yeah. But risky doing that, because most places the wire, we used to set up devices which would make a noise if anybody touched it, you know.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to hear that noise, would you?
Well, we wouldn't have, we ourselves wouldn't have opened fire, but it would have stood us two, you know, we'd have stood two, because we thought maybe an attack was imminent. But it's different with the Americans. You go up there and if they had a movement just in front of them, they'd open fire with everything, they would. Yeah.
Did you ever experience real Korean War, as it were?
Oh yeah, well, I mentioned my thing there, we got flooded out of our bivvy when I was up with the Norfolks. We had 2 or 3 feet of water in there, so we had to move out. And we went back down the reverse slope of the hill and just had our ponchos over the top for covering. It was raining heavily. And we were shelled, and one of the shells hit this bivvy that we had been occupying and went in through a ventilation, took the roof off. So we were lucky, actually. If it hadn't been raining, I'd have been in there. So I never moan about the rain.
Yeah. You fell in a hole, and it had been a bunker occupied by.
Oh yeah, when that was on the gun position, actually, because we were in a paddy field with the gun position, but I thought, well, we'll make it a bit festive. I'll go and get a tree to decorate for Christmas. Because at that time we didn't know we were going to come out of the line. We thought we were going to be there. So I went up the back of this up this hill behind the command post. It was covered in trees, plenty of trees up there to choose. But as I went up there, the ground just gave way at this particular part, and I sort of fell in, and it had been a trench. But it had been shelled, and there were a couple of decaying corpses in there. Yeah. It was, they were in, you know, sort of some point of decomposition, but they still smelt.
Yeah. Had you experienced death and that sort of thing at that point? Had you lost any friends or anything?
No, not personally. No. I suppose it's luck, really, because you have these incidents. I mean, we were being mortared all the time. Mortars would land very close to where you were, and if you were in a trench, they'd land right beside the trench itself, and you could actually feel the ground shake, you know, with the explosion. But no, I never experienced the sort of witnessed somebody getting killed like that. No,
Lucky, yeah.
Fortunately.
And then you didn't, as you said just now, you didn't know that you were coming out. How do you
Well,
remember? What were you told, and how do you feel? And can you remember that?
We didn't know until the early part of December that we were going to pull out of the line. They obviously they thought they would try and prevent the enemy getting to find out that the 14th Field Regiment was going to leave the line, because the whole regiment was coming out, and the 20th Field was going to take our place. But they obviously knew about it, because we we had prior information during December that to sort of be prepared, because the Chinese were going to give us a send-off. But they left it a bit late. They actually timed it wrong. and their send-off was met by the 20th Field. They just moved in.
Yeah, you got out.
So
And what do you remember about coming back and coming home? And
well,
was there a
You went
reception?
to Hong Kong first, didn't you?
yeah, we came out the line. We went to the whole regiment moved back to the new territories in Hong Kong, Kowloon, and we occupied.
Leonard told me that he went AWOL because he was having such a good time there.
Yeah. We were stationed in a place called Quarry Camp, which was up in the New Territories. But I put it to good use. I learned to ride a motorcycle there. I had a motorcycle. I used to go out and ride around the New Territories on it, learning to ride.
Cool.
And we used to do observation duties there as well, right up on the front, overlooking what China proper. There was like a river came down through, and the other side of the river, a bridge went across, and then there was a station which was occupied by the Chinese. But we used to do observation from an observation post and mark any movements of personnel coming off the trains, especially if they were in uniform. Note where they went, because all these features, like a panoramic view it was. You could see where they were going, and used to put it log it down in a log. Because used to fire these shells, used to have to take the cap off, as it were. They had Bakelite cap on them, over the striking pin, on the nose of the shell. I used to remove that when you fire them, but we'd leave them on and just put a piece of wire around under the cap and tighten it down. So when the shell was revolving, it would scream, you know.
Oh, yeah, you see that as well, yeah, screaming. Like a Nebelwerfer almost.
Well, yeah. Yeah, of course it would affect the range of the shell. That was the trouble. The OP would go ballistic because it would upset all his calculations. You know.
What did they call when they dropped short? What were they called? There was a name described. The infantry used to call the artillery shells that dropped short. They were called something. Do you know?
I
can't remember.
No. I mean, we had one shell actually landed short at the Norfolk. It landed close to the cookhouse, which didn't go down too well.
Oh, there. Good. And what about coming back to England? Do you remember your reception, your welcome?
I don't really, because all I remember is we came back it was on the Orwell still, and I think it was the Orwell, but the ship itself had engine trouble, and we had to put into Malta, and we were stuck in Malta for over a week, waiting for parts to come out from the UK to repair this fault with the ship. And again, we spent all our money. There was not enough money on board to pay us for an unintended stay. So nobody had any money, and so when we eventually arrived we went into Liverpool as a homecoming. The customs officer there, I had a watch. I bought a watch in Hong Kong or Kowloon while I was there, and always said there'd be something to pay on that. I said, well, you better take the watch. I said, because none of us have got any money. I explained the circumstances. Oh, that's all right. I said, so he marked everything off, and I think they made a point then of stopping all the officers as they come through. But they let all the lads through. They marked everything off with the mark, and we came through. And then we trained back down to Woolwich. But the annoying thing was, when we got to Woolwich, they confined us all to barracks, because they thought if we were let loose, you know, we'd head for the nearest pub and that would be it, yeah. But they confined us to barracks, and to ensure that we didn't leave the camp, they put us on fatigues. One of those was weeding the track, the running track at Woolwich Barracks, just on your hands and knees, weeding it, yeah.
Gutted.
And I mean, personally, I mean, I could have got on a train, I could have been home in an hour, because I lived at Camberley. You know, coming down from Woolwich, I could have got a train straight down to Camberley,
That's almost
for an hour and a half or so.
demoralising, really.
It was, and of course, I'm getting to the point of the mob, you know, I was reaching the end of my 5 years service with the colours, and I remember they paraded us one morning there, the RSM, he came out and he said, we want people to sign on again, we want to re-sign on. I said, no way.
After all that career and what you experienced and what you did, you obviously saw Searle. What was it like going back to Korea?
On the revisit, it was quite an experience, the first time in all those years, and of course you didn't know what to expect when you got there. Because when we landed at Incheon airport, everything was so built up, you know, they'd really gone down. Everyone made you very welcome, you know, when you were there. And of course, when you came through, we had these buses laid on, which had the slogan on the side of them saying, Korean War veterans, we will never forget you, sort of thing. And they transported us back to Seoul, to this big hotel, which was in the centre of Seoul. And when we got there, we went into the foyer, all the staff of the hotel were formed up in the foyer and welcoming us.
What was it like to see Seoul again after all those years?
It was unrecognisable. I didn't recognise any of it from as I remember seeing it. I mean, as I said when I was talking to the ambassador lady there, I said that I just didn't recognise anywhere. I said even this place had been occupied twice by the enemy during the conflict, which it had. Yeah.
How do you feel about being a Korean veteran now?
Well, it's interesting, obviously, to go to our meetings and meet up with the lads that are left. But of course, we're all going off one by one. And Terry Price, he went recently, and that happens quite often, doesn't it, as you get older?
Yeah.
So eventually, I suppose it will. There won't be anybody left.
And what do you think about doing things like this?
As an interview, well, I think it's a good thing if it gets put through to educate to the young people, because I even going out as I do, I go to to have a meal at the church cafe down here, and if you mention Korea, a lot of people have to think, what's Korea? Who's Korea? You know, where is it? A lot of people don't know where it is or what the war was.